Hi everyone, welcome back to Suck It Up Buttercup, my second interview with Peter Lloyd. This one's going to be amazing because Peter is actually here. Say hello, Peter. Thank you for joining me.
Woohoo! We made it this time. I'm so sorry, everyone, for yesterday. It was a bit of a IT glitch, I'm afraid, but we're here now, and that's the main thing. So
that's the important thing. Now, next week I will be joined by Jonathan Roth from Israel, also known as Skeptor, also known as Ask a Jew. He's going to be joining me with Obsidian Raw, formerly from Just Four Guys, and Lauren B., a member of our social media team here at Voice for Men. And next week we're going to discuss how men's rights activists are all middle-aged white guys who can't get laid. Should be a fun show. I hope you tune in. Of course, it's Saturday at 3. We just screwed up our interview. But we have Peter here now. Peter, let's see the cover of your book, because I read an e-version, so I didn't actually get a book.
Okay, so here it is. Here's my literary baby. There it is.
Beautiful. Congratulations.
Yeah. I feel like I should go like that for it or something. You know, my muscles don't quite have the same effect as the ones on the book, so we had to superimpose, I'm afraid.
Well, it's well done. Okay, you near the end of the book, you talk about how you came to write men's issues column at the Daily Mail, and you discuss a particular woman in your office who's really sexist, and I don't suppose you tell me who that is.
Nice try. I'm here in Daily Mail HQ actually, so this is a sneak preview of some of our studio settings here in the building, but no, I can't because she might kill me or sue me, and I'm not sure which is worse. But all I will say is that she is name-checked in the book, so it's probably quite easy to identify her, but yes.
Okay, now I have to go back and find out who it is. It's not like there's a shortage of sexist women at the Daily Mail.
Well, you know, but I have to say, I kind of, you know, it was her and a few of her people like her who kind of really started the ball rolling with the book anyway. So, you know,
what was the original reception to your columns from your colleagues and from the general public? Like when you first started writing about men's issues and sexism that men face, how did people react to that?
Really well, actually, surprisingly well. I mean, I think initially when I first started doing it, I was kind of given some warning, and there's a bit of trepidation around me doing it because people said, you know, this is career suicide, and nobody really talks or writes about this stuff, so you have to be very careful. And I just kind of thought, well, I read controversial, opinionated things all the time, and everybody else seems to be able to say what they feel, and as long as it's respectful, I didn't see what the problem is. So I just went for it, and I have to say the feedback from everyone was really good. The readers, both male and female, were largely very kind of simpatico and supportive, and a lot of my colleagues just, you know, appreciate it for what it is, that it's just opinion, and I really love that because I have a lot of women who I work with who, you know, really don't take offense at some of the things I say, and I'm glad because I wouldn't want them to, but you know, a lot of more sensitive people could be very feel a bit slighted by it.
I found that to be my experience too, that there's this group, like you've got this very loudmouth group of feminists in the UK who started this Ban the Lad Mags campaign, and they get a lot of coverage, but honestly they don't represent average people. I mean, I thought you had a really good observation about the lad mags, that they offer men a space in which to consider their bodies and consider their relationships and identities in ways that aren't readily available anywhere else. So lad mags, far from harming women, actually give men a space to explore different ways of interacting with women in a completely virtual way. I mean, they're actually a really good thing. That's what I took away from your book.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, lads mags, you know, they may not be the bastion of good taste, but they certainly have a place in the market. They are, you know, human beings are sexual beings, and sexuality is something natural and healthy. And you know, to kind of hone in on that in a lads mag is absolutely fine. I think what's happened is sexuality and politics have been forced to mix, and they're not common bedfellows anyway. So of course that's why people have so many issues with it, and it's a problem that can't be solved because humans are sexual and they're always going to be sexual. So they're always going to have these sexual desires, and they're always going to want to and need to satisfy them. And you know, these magazines often just satisfy a mental part of sexuality for a lot of men, and that's healthy. That's so healthy. So I was trying to.
Sorry,
I was trying to do that in the book because there's so much messages that men should be kind of embarrassed or feel ashamed of their sexuality, and they should try and almost like tether it to the fence outside kind of thing. And really, that instills a real shame and sense of embarrassment in people. And it's like, I just wanted to clarify that absolutely isn't the case. And the great thing is, the women who work on these magazines love it. It's their job. It's their careers. It's what they want to do. It's what they're good at. So the fact that there are other women trying to ban them is irony at the greatest level. You know, it's just bizarre.
Where do you think the feminist opposition comes from? I mean, in my review I wrote, bitches be jealous, basically, that they're resentful of women who have this bargaining power and this sexuality. But do you think there's more to it than just that? Is there something else behind this particular ideological group hating on men's sexuality?
Well, I mean, I think it's probably very complex, but really one of the things I noted that I found doing my research was that it's really a feminist picket line. And I think for a lot of feminists, these women who pose in magazines or work on these magazines or who just tolerate them respectfully are almost crossing that picket line. And the thinking behind it is the more resources we keep from men, the more bargaining power we have. And the better our bargaining position. So if we keep sex from men and almost kind of bargain them with it, dangle the carrot, as it were, we'll be able to kind of exchange that for more resources and power and money in different ways in society. So I think that's probably really what it's all about. And a lot of these women who claim to be feminists and claim to be, advocating for equality and yet want to take women's choice away are actually saying, you can't be sexual on your own terms. You can only do it if it's politically advantageous to us as a group, and that isn't how sex works.
No, absolutely not. I mean, I liked all your observations about this myth that male sexuality peaks at 18. So basically, the moment a boy becomes a man, he starts his sexual decline. And then the other side of that story is that women will peak at whatever, 35, 50, whatever imaginary fantasy they have.
Yeah.
So basically, the moment we become adults, men's value declines and women's goes up. That's a very convenient little truth, isn't it? Myth, more like.
Yeah, it was. And Janet, it's so funny because speaking to you now, I'm realizing how autobiographical the book is in many ways, because these are all things that I was told and I was taught as I was growing up as a young man. I was, not me personally, but I would kind of observe in the media and through osmosis, I'd absorb all these, facts and truisms that men peak at 18 years of age sexually, and women peak much later on. And I, all these things really kind of got embedded in me, and I was thinking at one point, God, we really are like the second gender. It's really sad, it's really terrible. And then I realised it was all bullshit. And so that's why the chapter is so called.
Bullshit, yeah. So sex is cast as something men do to women so that women can be victims. But the same women who claim to be victimized by male sexuality will use their erotic capital to get resources from men on a personal level. I mean, that's a direct quote from you. I thought that was just so interesting, that it really is, the truism, follow the money, really is true. This whole myth has been created so that women can more effectively pull resources out of men.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's strange. Obviously, there are human beings who abuse sex and abuse the kind of consent and violation rules around sex, but they're not just men. Obviously, men and women do that, and that happens across the board. But I think what's happened is there's almost a gulf between the genders now, where it's considered men are kind of predatory, and almost willing to take advantage of women any opportunity, and women are weak and vulnerable, and that's just offensive and a bit patronising to both genders, because I mean, women love sex as much as men love sex, and without one or the other, it's a bit of a lost cause. So I think there's definitely something political that's happened here, where we've kind of almost, vilified men and their sexuality, because it's something they can never escape from. And of course, in the sex exchange, it's women who grant men sex. So that's
Right.
where the bargaining power is, because women are up here in the bargaining power and men are down here. So men will do more to get the sex, and women will want more to get it. So by making men feel guilty and casting men as the bad guys, keeps those locked positions in place.
Yeah, and it's in my own personal life. I mean, it sounds like such an exploitive relationship that you're describing, but I think in my own personal relationship, I don't have a paid income or a career. I do a lot of work, and I do lots of different things, but I don't contribute to my family in an economic way. And I'm close to middle-aged woman with 3 children. I could
Don't believe it.
I could easily give up all of my, just let myself physically go. But I don't, because I feel like, it's not that I feel like I need to do this to extract resources. I feel like that's a fair trade for my husband. So even though it's kind of exploitive, is it necessarily really bad? Is it a bad thing that women can deploy erotic capital to get some of the things they want? Just because you can use it doesn't mean you're abusing it, I guess is what I mean.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, and they're all great things about human sexuality. It's only when people start kind of policing them that it becomes a bit of a problem, and when other people start telling others how they can use their sexuality and how they can use their desires and how they should consume them, that is when it becomes a problem. As long as everything's legal and safe and sane, I'm all for it. So.
Yeah, there's one group in society that has the freedom to explore their sexuality in a way that others don't, because that sexuality doesn't involve women. So can you talk about that group for us?
Yeah. So I note in the book, in the sex chapter, whenever you read anything about men and sex, gay men and straight men are always kept apart. You never really see them or hear them referenced in the same sentence. But I wanted to do that in this chapter because I think it's really important to contrast how straight men and gay men operate in terms of sex socially, because all men are programmed with the same testosterone, the same brains, the same approach to sex to a greater or lesser extent. And yet when it plays out socially, it's so different. I mean, in central London, in Soho, that's kind of the gay capital of London, really. And there you will just see so much freedom of expression. You will see bars with go-go boy dancers, and you'll see like male strippers, and it's all fine. And I noticed in doing the research that at no point have feminists ever objected to the gay sex clubs or the gay strip joints in London. It's only ever been when a woman has been involved. So what I noticed that was male sexuality, when it's gay, is considered fine because there's no female victim. And yet straight men who have exactly the same drive as a lot of gay men and probably want to display and enjoy their sexuality in a lot of the same way, in the same liberal sense, can't do that because they're so policed into being inhibited and to feeling kind of guilty and ashamed for wanting to enjoy sex, when actually it's obviously the natural condition.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, it was such an interesting chapter, and it led into the discussion about the virtues of porn. That setting aside these prissy women who want to control heterosexual male sexuality, and attacking porn and pornography is a huge way they do that. But there are actually a lot of virtues to pornography.
Yeah, and I'm loath to say that I did lots of research for that chapter. But,
I'll bet.
but what can I say? I mean, I have to, porn does have virtues, and I'm not talking about just from like a kind of personal sexual level. But I interviewed a female porn director from the UK, and and she was explaining to me that actually porn is great because you can really sate your own sexual appetite with porn, and you can use it to kind of a lot of younger people use it to kind of explore sex and sexuality and to become familiar with it. A lot of people view it to get in the mood for a partner or into a moment, or to enhance a moment with their partner, and a lot of people also use it to kind of delve into new areas of sexuality that perhaps one partner might be interested in a particular persuasion, and it's a nice way. Pornography is a nice way to bridge a gap between people who maybe have different sexual interests. But let's also not forget that it's been around forever. Hundreds and hundreds of years ago there was pornography. The Romans used pornography. It's nothing new, and the only reason now it's considered a big deal is because it has a relevance, and it's commercial, and it's easy to kind of to jump on the bandwagon and use it as a vehicle to get press.
These same people who object so heartily to visual pornography don't seem to have a lot of comments to make about literary pornography, which is what women prefer, right? The whole 50 Shades of Grey thing. So you'll have, I don't know if you recently saw Judy Chang talking about Gamergate and how you can do these terrible things to female characters in video games. You can do terrible things to everybody in video games. Yet the terrible things that happen to this woman in 50 Shades of Grey, I mean, he just beats her up, he bites her, slaps her, humiliates her, he does all this before he fucks her, she loves it. How is this exempt from this accusation of misogyny? Women's own desires seem to be, to objectify and violently take women. I mean, and that's what they want. That's what they want to read. 50 million copies, I think, have been sold. It's crazy. Why is literary porn exempt?
Yeah, exactly. And let's not forget that the female writer of 50 Shades of Grey, is, I mean, you could apply the same argument to say that she's objectifying the male character in it. It would be quite easy to do that, and I think if E.L. James was a man, if you swapped the genders, it would be a very, very different book. It would never have been published, and it would never have been as successful. So, and let's also not forget that around 30% of online users of porn are female. I mean, it's absurd to think that only men enjoy sex and the visualization, the representation of sex. It's just absurd. With the internet, I mean, it's been such a leveler in terms of pornography, and I think that's really what's changing everything, because the internet is showing that both men and women enjoy sex, and that society isn't turning into, it's not become any more dangerous because porn is more readily accessible. All the figures show otherwise, and the fact that a third of users are female show that actually it's just a human interest. Porn is a human interest. It's not a male interest.
Right, I agree with that. Let's talk about the Fraud of the Rings. What a great name for a chapter. That was pretty fantastic. I was absolutely fascinated by the guys who got sued for fraud when they just got engaged. So we're literally in a legal environment where if you even get engaged to a woman, you can be forced to pay her money if you don't.
I love this. Unbelievable.
It really is unbelievable. What is a post-nuptial agreement? You wrote about that in your book, but I was going to Google it, and I thought, no, I'll just wait and ask Peter. What's an example of a post-nuptial agreement that can help men navigate marriage, the ones who choose to get married?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I actually hadn't heard of it before until I was researching the book, and the term came up when I interviewed a really, really good high-end lawyer here in London, and she told me about it, and she said basically now what's happened is, as with a prenup, you would agree a financial settlement before you exchange vows. Obviously, after you get married, if you suddenly, came into a lot of money, or you invented something and it became a huge seller, or you wrote a pornographic literary book for women and it was a huge hit, and you got lots of money for it, you could then say, okay, so now this has come in, and we can do a second agreement as we're a married couple, and we can divide the assets this way if we split. So it's really the continual management of an initial prenup. Okay,
and are those enforceable? Like, if let's say that happens and the husband or the wife goes to court and says, no, I don't agree with that. He forced me to sign this. It was coerced. I mean, are these agreements going to be enforced?
Increasingly, yeah, they are being enforced. And the great thing about a post-nup is that you don't necessarily need to have a prenup to get one. So if you married 10 years ago and you didn't have any money and you didn't make a prenup, and now you're getting, you're deciding you would like one, it's not too late if you're already married. So there's a lot of freedom for men who are married and would like to kind of protect themselves in anticipation of a separation. But increasingly they are being applied, and that is encouraging, I think. And it's really, I mean, the lawyer in the book, who is excellent, says herself, the only way men should get married is if they have a prenup.
That's probably a good idea, given how absurd marriage and divorce laws are. I'm kind of glad my husband didn't, but...
But Jana, all those cases insane. I mean, I don't know if the viewers of this will know it from the book, but I'm talking about two men, I think they were from the US, who just got engaged to women, and I think they were just, planning a wedding maybe in like 2 years' time, and they called it off. And they still got sued by their ex-fiancés for alimony, and the women were successful in their legal fight.
That's what makes me so worried about prenuptial and post-nuptial agreements, that if that's the attitude in the court, my God, I'm not sure that even is a solution. Let's hope. It'll be interesting to see some test cases go through on these post-nuptial agreements. I hope they are enforceable. I think it's a really smart idea. But sometimes laws don't even matter. I mean, there's no law anywhere in the world or anywhere in North America that I'm aware of that says a guy needs his wife's written permission to have a vasectomy, but in fact, that's the practice. How do they get away with this?
I know, it's just another insanity, and really, this book should be classed as fiction because people wouldn't believe half the stuff that's in it, but it's all real, I'm afraid. And this is something that's just kind of dripped over, information-wise, over to the UK, and people here are starting to talk about it because, in America, men cannot go to their doctors and get a vasectomy unless they have written permission from their wife, and the doctor will call the wife, verify, and then we'll perform the procedure. So forget that it's a man's body, forget that it's a man's choice, forget that it's about, that men have fewer options for birth control. He is still being policed and having his future and his body decided by another human being. Forget that it's a woman. It's another human being is ultimately giving consent, which is outrageous.
But it's just completely... But I had no idea that was true. I learned that just from reading your book, and I was just gobsmacked. And I started looking around for that, and I found on a chat board in the U.S. military, no married soldier, no married member of the military is allowed to have a vasectomy without his wife's written permission. It's not. There's no federal law, but it's enshrined in military practice. You think these are like soldiers? Soldiers need to ask their wife permission? Are you kidding me? But they do.
It's atrocious. Well, let's just say we switch the genders for a moment, and we say that a woman can only have an abortion or take the morning after pill if she gets her boyfriend's permission. I mean, that would be considered almost like Islamic State legislation. I mean, that would be considered extremely misogynistic, and it would be, because what a person wants to do with their body as an adult is entirely their business, male or female. So I am absolutely astonished that America, which, I mean, it's a country I love, but it scares me that it would allow this kind of practice to happen just so casually. It's outrageous.
It really is, and your use of the Islamic State there, I absolutely love some of the new words that you've coined in this book, like Gal-Qaeda and Shihadist. That was just brilliant. I love it. But another word that I thought was just fantastic is suffragent. That just made me giggle, and then as you started to explain what suffragent actually means, the whole concept of conscious masculinity, that was really, really well done. What a beautiful, thoughtful part of your book. I mean, I know you don't want to give everything away, but how about just a basic explanation of what being a suffragent means to you?
So, well, the term came about because I think it came about because I had too much wine, and that would probably make sense. But it came around because I wanted to take a word that was already kind of out there and familiar, and a very loaded word that meant a lot of, meant a lot to a lot of people. And I wanted to make a pun out of it so that it was kind of funny and, not too serious, because that's usually the way to kind of move forward with these things. But I also wanted it to be about men taking something and owning it for themselves and internalizing it. So, we hear all the time about the suffragettes and what they did for the women's movement, but actually men need a parallel. So it was just it was a great bit of language tweaking and twisting in a way. But for me, it's just all about, it really summarizes conscious masculinity, which is just being aware and open to what it means to be a man on a political level, as well as just a physical and biological level. And that is so important. Nobody tells men and boys to do this. Nobody tells men to be aware of the issues that face them in the workplace or in the military or in terms of finance with marriage or divorce, in terms of children, in terms of fathers' rights. Men are not. There is nothing in the education system, there's nothing in the media that informs men on these pitfalls of modern life. And it is absolutely perilous, because if something goes wrong and you're a man, there is no support network there for you. So for me, being a suffragette is all about being aware of these things, informing yourself, owning it, and then living your life, living an informed life with all that information, just to empower yourself and to protect yourself, and also to be kind of outwardly visible, to have a voice and say, I sued my gym, and that was something that really actually tapped into a vein with a lot of people. There is a lot of frustration with, around the men's movement because people aren't heard, and I think Warren Farrell said a brilliant thing, is that people can't hear what we don't say, and part of being a suffragette is about recognizing these frustrations and saying them out loud, and saying, oi, why am I paying more for this gym membership when I get 400 hours less? And it's those little things that can make a big difference.
Yeah, that gym situation was pretty interesting. How did it get resolved? For people who don't know, Peter is in a gym in downtown London, and there are special hours that are set aside for only women. So only women can access that facility. But men and women pay the exact same for their memberships, where women get access to the gym more. So it doesn't make sense. How did that issue get resolved, Peter, or has it been?
Yeah, it has been. It was settled out of court, but unfortunately I can't talk about it at all for legal reasons. So, but yes, it was resolved, and really the main point of it for me was just to make it a talking point in the media, and just to get people talking about men's issues, and to question. That's also one of the key things about being a suffragette, is to question the status quo, and to protect masculinity and your sense of masculinity. So when you hear that, domestic violence spikes during the, NFL or something, to question where that information comes from, because it's just not true. The pay gap is, there are some isolated incidents, but as a rule, it's spin. It's, feminist spin from the 70s that was designed to whip up a reaction and anger, and it was successful. It was brilliantly successful, but it's not really true. So that is all part of being a suffragette.
Excellent. Okay, you wrote in your book that men are not allowed to be weak on their own terms. Can you explain a little bit what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think I was just kind of saying that, a lot of the issues that are raised in the book, when you talk about men's issues and the disadvantages they face, a lot of critics will respond and say, yeah, but that's the patriarchy, or yeah, but if men just toughened up a bit and dealt with it, then it'd be fine, and feminism is the solution to that. And for me, that doesn't really connect, and it certainly doesn't offer an explanation or a solution. I think men being weak on their own terms is about them saying, do you know what, I am really hurt by the fact that women are being sexist against me, and in the family courts, or I'm really offended that mothers are being sexist to fathers, and that upsets me, and that makes me emotional on my terms, and I'm sorry that that doesn't fit in with what's politically correct to talk about, but this is what upsets me. I'm upset that I'm going to die 8 years earlier than my sisters because the NHS won't put the same money into my care. So it's about almost like breaking the rules on what you're allowed to be upset about, and also having a voice about things. You know, you see all these programs where it's like, you know, I like shows like Sex and the City. I think there was one episode where I think there was a guy who cried, and they were on a date, and they were like, "Oh my God, I don't want a guy who ever cries." You know, and it's kind of like, well, do you know what? It's not really about what you want. I can, you know, it's a human thing, and I can just do whatever I want with it. So it's almost disregarding the old traditional rules of what was acceptable for men to do, and ripping up the rule book, and just I think you said it in your review really well, just about being yourself and being true to yourself, and if others don't like it, tough.
Too bad. And, you know, it's interesting how deeply ingrained in the culture that whole boys don't cry thing is. My husband's father, he's a big football player. He's a really big guy. He's like the manliest guy. And he loves nothing more than to sit on the couch and watch World War II movies or watch really emotional movies with a big box of Kleenex. Him and my husband sit on the couch and they just openly weep over these movies. There's no shame. We don't make fun of them. I often join in. But my son, who's only 8, he's very, there's a lot of trepidation. Like, he's very reluctant to join in, and if he starts to get emotional, he'll run away, even though he lives in a home with men who are very openly able to cry. That larger, broader culture has taught him that it's not okay. It disturbs me in a lot of ways, and I do try and let him know, you know, it's all right. You can still be a man. You can still be a boy when you cry. But he's so nervous about that. It's kind of upsetting to see how deeply ingrained that is. I didn't put it there. It's come from outside.
Yeah, and you know, of course, the reason that is because that kind of weakness is I mean, I don't want to lay all the blame with women or feminism. Please don't get me wrong, but the reason men are afraid to cry is because they don't want to be downgraded by the opposite sex as weak, and that keeps men in this trap of, I can't communicate honestly because I might lose my kind of social footing with women. And that's important to maintain. So this is why men, I mean, I think this is really one of the reasons why men don't politically communicate about all the issues that are in this book and that are on A Voice for Men, because people don't want to upset people and, you know, upset the apple cart kind of thing. And actually that's a key point in the men's movement, is being vocal and, you know, not deliberately upsetting people, not being disrespectful, but to stir things up. And not to even give women or anybody else that power to limit your expression of emotion, or, you know, or to your feelings and stuff. And let's not forget that here in Britain, I don't know what it's like in the US and Canada, but men's suicide rates are at a 10-year high.
Same here. Yeah, same situation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's pretty much a global issue, and yet still there is this policing of men's emotion and what men are allowed to do, which, I mean, that must be a contributing factor to that. It must be.
It must be. And I think you've just hit on an absolutely key issue that I've never been able to articulate before. But feminists will say that men don't cry because they don't want to be disrespected by other men, that this is something that men impose on each other. That's all patriarchy theory. What we're saying is, no, this is actually, men don't want to lose respect in the eyes of women. It's actually women who are imposing this limitation on men. And I think right there is the big difference between the feminist social justice warrior view and the men's rights, men going their own way view, is that no one is questioning that men are emotionally crippled, that they're held into an emotional straitjacket. But there's our big difference. Feminists are saying men do it to themselves. It's patriarchy. It has nothing to do with us. And what we're saying is, no. Okay, we need to interrogate the role that women are playing in this whole situation. That's what a great. I'm going to go back and read that chapter again, Peter, because I think I missed a whole bunch of stuff.
But, you know, Janet, it's if you look at football matches, or, you know, where men go, or if you look at pubs where men drink, and after they've had a few drinks, the love in the room is gorgeous. You know, there's a lot of expression, there's a lot of fraternity, and like men will hug, and I mean, just I was walking to the office today, and I saw I think they were kind of like an Arabic family, and there were two sets of families going separate ways, and the men as they were leaving, they kissed each other on the cheek, which is a kind of typical parting customary gesture. But that, I mean, for me, I see all these pockets of men being emotional and being illiterate in their emotions in these little ways where they're allowed to be without criticism. Men can go to a football match and express emotion through football and sport because it's deemed okay by women. And yet when they get emotional about politics, they're written off as extreme. Like the Fathers, I mean, look at the Fathers for Justice guys. I mean, these men are absolutely driven by pure, unadulterated emotion. And yet, because of that, they are written off as extreme. When actually, if we were talking about women in those situations, the fault would rest with the patriarchy. It's interesting.
It is very interesting. What a great observation. Yeah. So that's when women invade traditional male spaces like Gamergate, and men push back against that, saying you're welcome in here, but you're not welcome to start tone or emotion policing us in here. Women immediately brand that as misogyny. This is men hating women rather than women coming into a space that isn't really theirs and deciding what they are and aren't allowed to approve of. It's interesting. Video games are a virtual space that are predominantly for men, and women are in there trying to police them emotionally. This is really interesting. I definitely have to read that chapter again because I think you've just articulated a really key part of the whole debate. It's not men who police men, it's women who police men.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Let's talk about big orexia. That's another word that I hadn't come across, that whenever we have discussions about body image and unrealistic standards, we're almost always talking about women, but there's just as much pressure on men.
Yeah. Oh my God, absolutely. I know a doctor who's kind of like a TV personality doctor over here in the UK called Dr. Christine Jessen, lovely guy, and he suffered from bigorexia, and that is essentially where men are so obsessed with bulking up and being muscly and having this physical manifestation of masculinity, which is kind of what we see in the book here. I mean, that's kind of what we were getting at. Men will take steroids and they will live in the gym, and that excessive dedication to achieving body perfection is just as extreme and just as dangerous as it is for a woman to be anorexic. And that is kind of one of the things that's just overlooked. We talk all the time about how magazines promote negative body images with women and how this is terrible, blah, blah, blah. But none of these feminist groups ever say, okay, well, what about magazines like Men's Health? Or what about these, like the Diet Coke ad break, where we see, very muscular, perfectly toned men pleasing women? Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and for me, this is one of the areas where this constant drip of men being bad, men being crap, men being a bit shit, men being a bit shameful. This is how it starts to manifest, because you start thinking, my penis isn't big enough, my muscles aren't big enough, my bank balance isn't big enough, my car isn't big enough, and this is when it starts to overtake reality, and men can lose their way, and really it's painful to watch, and it's awful, and really that was one of the driving forces for me writing the book, is just to say, do you know what, we're all good.
Yeah, you talk about men and toxic masculinity, that idea that toxic masculinity is to blame for men's problems. But in reality, we have some pretty toxic femininity that's out there policing. I thought it was very interesting when you're talking where the idea of the super toxic, hyper expressions of femininity and masculinity, they tend to come from one particular type of family, right?
Yeah. There was a study that I looked into, and it said that when there is a father absent in a family, the children tend to kind of adopt hyper-exaggerated versions of their own gender. So the girls will be very sexual, very overtly sexual, in a kind of Miley Cyrus way very early on, whereas the boys will be, typically swaggering and trying to sleep with as many girls as possible, and essentially that is all stemming from the hole in the soul, as I say.
It's kind of an interesting phenomenon that when you take the patriarch out of the home, you get toxic masculinity. I mean, I thought the patriarch was who was supposed to cause that toxic masculinity and femininity. When you pull them out, that's how you get it. So it's clearly not the patriarch who's causing this problem.
I mean, there are a lot of single mothers who do wonderful jobs and find themselves in that situation through no fault of their own, or they function fine in that way through choice, whatever. But for decades now, we've had a situation, especially in Britain, where fathers are being gradually nudged out of the family, and the family has been restructured and rebuilt and redefined as, if you've got a father in it, then you're lucky, but generally it's just the mother and the children. And if you look at the timeline that has happened, and also some of the things that have happened in society, such as kind of youth crime or failure of boys in schools and this kind of thing, there really is a pattern. I'm not saying there's an absolute direct link, but there absolutely are some crossovers. And you have to ask the question: if mothers and fathers are the yin and yang balance of families, and you take away an integral part of that, that's going to have a consequence. That's not to say women aren't wonderful and that women don't do great jobs as mothers and as parents and sometimes even as single parents, but if you take away an important ingredient, then the end result is of course going to be different.
Yeah, okay. One last question for you. Okay. You talk about consuming media actively and not passively. Explain how you do that. How do you consume media in an active way and in a passive way? What's the difference between those two?
So just to question the sources of where all this information comes from. So if you read a newspaper headline that says, the gender pay gap has worsened by 20%. Don't just take it on face value, because even though you may not consciously realize you're doing it, when you do, you're accepting that, and that is the image you have of yourself as a man is changing, or for women, the image you have of other men is slightly changing, it's slightly being doctored by this agenda. Whereas if you it's almost like wearing a filter over your brain, and when you hear these things that might plant a negative seed in your brain about men or mankind, to question it and to process it. It's almost like when you have those airport scanners, those security scanners at airports, when you do that with your brain, when you get this information and you hear about how men are terrible and boys are terrible at school and not performing and girls are so much better, question it, analyze it, see where it comes from, and then test its own validity, because half the time it's just spin and it's not real. And these things can be toxic for the soul and the sense of self.
I agree. Now, a lot of people will be saying, oh my God, that's a lot of information to go out and collect. But you know what? Luckily, there's a book available that you can purchase if you want to just start exploring some of these issues. And that book is Stand By Your Manhood by British journalist, author, writer, Peter Lloyd. It's a wonderful book. I recommend it for anyone who is just beginning to explore men's issues, or people who've been in it for a long time. And there's stuff in there that I didn't know that completely shocked me. It's actually worse than we think it is. Stand By Your Manhood is an absolutely fabulous resource. It's 11:54. Peter, do you want to have the last word here and sign us out?
Yeah, well, firstly I wanted to say thank you, Jenna, for your wonderful review, which was absolutely lovely, and it's very flattering that it came from your good self. I feel like I've been blessed by the Pope. It's lovely. But also thank you to everyone on A Voice for Men who's been really supportive so far. And I wrote this book for all of us and for everyone on the site, and so I really hope you get to enjoy it. And please message me if you have any feedback or you'd like to ask me anything. I'd be more than happy to kind of discuss with you. But thanks very much.